When you think of Mitsubishi, you think of two things: the desecration of their legendary nameplates and rallying. Mitsubishi, and specifically their pairing of the Lancer Evolution and Tai Mäkinen, proved to be amazing at rallying. 22 of his 24 WRC victories were behind the wheel of a Lancer Evolution. It resulted in the 1998 Constructors' title and 4 consecutive Drivers' titles between 1996 and 1999. But what most people forget is that Mitsubishi had been rallying long before Mäkinen and Burns had their fun. This is the story of the Pajero Evolution, Mitsubishi's other Evo. But first, we have to talk about the Toyota Land Cruiser. The J60 variant followed in the footsteps of the Range Rover and entered the new SUV market in 1980. Mitsubishi couldn't let their national rivals conquer this new market unchecked, so the Pajero was brought in 1981 and entered production by 1982. That's a very fast timetable to go from realization to concept to production car in less than 2 years. But the counterpoint to that is you take the badges off and park it next to a J60, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Mitsubishi needed to distinguish themselves. So they looked at their history and remembered that time in the 1970s when they went rallying in Africa. You see, all 3 of their WRC victories by this point were in the Safari and Ivory Coast rallies. But while they were on rallying hiatus, an endurance motorcycle rider got so inspired by his time lost in the Sahara Desert that he wanted others to have his fun. So he founded the Paris-Dakar Rally in 1977 with 182 entrants venturing into the desert. By 1982, that number exploded to almost 400. Mitsubishi put 2 and 2 together and made a plan. They entered some Pajero prototypes into the lightly modified class, so they had some strengthening, a roll cage, and some minor bodywork changes, but nothing crazy. And then they drove into the largest sand desert on Earth against over 400 other competitors, and came out with a 1-2 finish in their class, 11th overall. And that was just a start. They got another class win the following year by finishing 3rd overall, and then they scored a 1-2 finish outright in 1985 ahead of their rival Land Cruisers. Mitsubishi would win outright again in 1992, 1993, and 1997, with podium finishes in an additional 5 Dakar rallies. Many people would consider that phenomenal, and Mitsubishi wanted to be better. The problem is, the French juggernauts of Peugeot and then Citroën were almost unstoppable, and Mitsubishi realized they had to find an advantage. Enter the T2 subclass of the Cars class. Cars were divided into T1 for improved cross-country vehicles, T2 which was for serial production cars, and T3 which was for light vehicles. Now, when the classes first came out, T1 was a little too restrictive for their liking, and T3 didn't allow for factory-backed efforts. So Mitsubishi set about entering the T2 class, but that had a problem all on its own. A production run of 2,500 cars was required to enter. A homologation run, as it is called in the industry. Now, all other manufacturers entering the T2 class just used existing SUVs and trucks from their lineup, but Mitsubishi took it a step further. Way further. The first step was a new naturally aspirated engine, a 3.5-liter V6 that made 276 horsepower and 256 torque. In unrelated news, Japan had a government policy to cap horsepower at 276 for safety reasons, so many suspect the Pajero Evolution made around 300 horsepower. But power is only a part of a racing car. You also need to be able to handle, and balancing agility with durability and off-road capability is a tricky balance. So they took the 3-door version of the Pajero, added massive fender flares, vents in those fenders to evacuate air from the wheel wells, multi-link independent suspension, torsion differentials, a functional hood scoop, and a full armored underbody. But the coolest thing by far is the functional rear wing molded into the roof and rear pillars. Just to recap, homologation rally car? Check. Functional aerodynamics? Check. Boxy fender flares? Check. It's the most 80s car to ever come out of the 90s. It's also noteworthy just how small the Pajero Evo is. I mean, yeah, it's based on the 3-door version, but the width is only 1.5 inches wider than a Focus, and its wheelbase is half a foot shorter than a Toyota GR86. This is a tiny thing. And that small size gives it incredibly steep approach and departure angles, while also having surprising agility and responsiveness for a 4,300-pound SUV on off-road tires. Sure enough, they repeated their dominant 1997 performance, scoring another 1-2-3-4 finish that was over 3 hours ahead of 5th place. The Pajero Evo was so good that it only lost out to purpose-built buggies in 1999 and 2000. And by the way, in 1999, they still finished 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 9th. But they weren't wins, which meant they came back in 2001 with another 1-2 finish. But then they got word that the T2 and T3 classes were merging, meaning that the 2nd gen Pajero in 2002 only had one more run in it. And oh boy, was it a spectacular one. After over 9,000 kilometers of driving, Mitsubishi scored 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 10th. The Toyota Land Cruiser in 9th was 15 hours behind the winner. That is Porsche 1983 Le Mans levels of domination. And just like that, the 2nd gen Pajero was done, and with it, the production requirements for the Evolution. Now that the Pajero was competing in the super production specification class, homologation wasn't necessary, so the Evolution variant of the 3rd gen Pajero wasn't sold to the public. No homologation meant no catering to road legality, not that the original Evo catered that much. So this one was even more dominant than the previous one, winning every single Dakar Rally until their withdrawal from racing in 2009 due to the financial collapse. In 2003, Mitsubishi shut out the top 4 places as well as the top 2 in 2004, 2005, and 2007. Their last win in 2007 was their 7th in a row and their 12th in total, a record that still stands today. They also have the most podium finishes and led 150 stages, twice as many as Peugeot in 2nd, and then they threw it all away. While Toyota is reinventing itself, Mitsubishi has become a shadow of its former self. Even Honda sells more cars in the US in a single month than Mitsubishi does all year. Would a return to sports cars and racing solve that? No, almost certainly not, but one thing is for sure. We will probably never see a return to their golden era of the 1990s ever again.